Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, well, welcome to the Advantage Podcast, and it's good to have all of you joining us. And I am real excited with the guests that we have with us today. It's Pastor John Jenkins. John, good to have you here with us and the Advantage team.
Thank you for having me. It is my honor and pleasure and delight to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let me tell you guys a little bit about John, and then we'll jump into conversation. But John is the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Glen Arden. And John, how long have you been there as the senior pastor?
I'm entering now my 35th year. This is year 35.
I knew it was a long time. So we'll come back, and I want you to tell us a little bit more of the history and your experience there at the church. He's also the chairman of the National Association of Evangelicals Board. You have been, I'm not sure if you're on still now, the World Vision Board, but you've been on World Vision's board, Denver Seminary Board. You are is it president of Converge?
I'm the president of a small denomination, about a little over 1,600 churches, almost 1,700 churches, called Converge. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And are you still working on classes at Wheaton College? Are you?
I graduated. Thank the Lord.
Good for you. Good for you. So he's doing all those things, plus being a husband, plus being a father, and you're a pilot. And so are you still flying much?
Yes, sir. Still, that's my golf. You know, a lot of guys play golf, and flying is my relaxation. But I do it now when I'm basically doing ministry, so I'll fly.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that works out great. Yeah, good. So it's real fun to have John with us today. And John, again, thank you for being here. I was going to ask you, what do you not do based on everything that you're already doing? But you've got a busy schedule, so thank you for taking time out with us.
It's my honor. Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be on your podcast, and I'm honored to be in relationship with you, David.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. So I'll just tell you guys real quick how John and I even met. If you go back to 2020, I believe, and COVID was going on, and George Floyd situation happened. And so there were just all kinds of tensions going on in the country and in my heart. And so I had opportunity. Actually, you guys know Andy Martin, and Andy happened to sit next to John on an airplane. I don't even know where you guys were flying from, but you guys sat next to each other on an airplane, started up a conversation. And so when I was wrestling with just some of the things going on racially, had opportunity to reach out to John, and it started just a fun relationship between the two of us back then, as we just tried to, well, I don't know if as I tried to wrestle through how do I navigate the racial tensions going on. And so very much appreciate your input in my life that way, John. So that was.
Well, David, I do engage in the Anglo world, if I could put it in that, if I can use that vernacular.
Sure.
But very rarely has a pastor reached out to me. As Andrew did, talking to me and telling me about you and telling me that he was going to share my contact information with you, and we connected. Very rarely has an Anglo pastor done that. And your interest, your curiosity, your willingness to engage with me was amazing and powerful. And it's going to be one of the things that I would encourage pastors to do, just to reach across the table, reach across the community and connect with somebody who may not look like you.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's been great having conversations with John. John's put me in front of other people or around other people. I don't know if you remember, John, there was a group meeting in Washington, D.C., maybe 10 or 15, well, it's probably 15 or 20 people around the table. Most everybody around the table, except for me, had been involved in this dialogue for a long, long time. And I remember sitting down, and everybody went around and introduced themselves, and it was people from all around the country. And I remember thinking, I don't even belong in this room and at this table. And then whoever was hosting it, I don't think it was you, but whoever was hosting said, we're just going to kind of jump in and talk about what we're feeling.
That was hosted by Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner. And
yes, that's right.
Tom Skinner's, some of you guys might know Tom Skinner, who really was an African-American involved with cultural events and reaching out to across the table as an African-American community leader. he passed some years ago, but his wife was who facilitated that meeting. And David, I knew you felt uncomfortable, but you really did well though. You pushed past your anxiety and you engaged, and
Well,
that
the
was
funny thing
wonderful.
was, yeah, Barbara then, if I may call her that, but she said, let's go around and just kind of share what's on our minds and what we think is going on. And then she picked me to go first. And as she was saying she was going to pick somebody, I'm crawling under the table thinking, please don't pick me, don't pick me. And she picks me first. I'm like, oh my goodness. So, but we survived that meeting and it was real beneficial for me anyway. And it's been great to be able to have conversations with you, John, and learn from you. I'd love to come back and talk about kind of what's going on racially, but I'd also love to hear you talk a little bit more about your experience there at First Baptist Glen Arden and how you even got into ministry. And if I remember conversations with you, you were young when you felt like God was calling you to be a pastor.
I was a teenager when I felt the call to preaching. I thought I was going to be an evangelist,
Okay.
and to just have the ability to go preach, pick up my hat and my check and leave. But somewhere during the course of, and I was a teenager. Back then in those days, my pastor licensed me to preach. That's a license just to go and communicate and preach. I couldn't do funerals or weddings, or I couldn't do anything legal like that because I wasn't ordained. Because that
Right.
was another step. But I started as a teenage preacher, going around preaching to churches, youth services, youth revivals, and did that, and then got called to my first church when I was probably close to 30, 20,
Okay.
29 or somewhere like that. So yeah, that's been my journey.
So tell us about your journey there at First Baptist Glen Arden, which is in Maryland and is now, well, tell us where it started and then kind of describe where you are now, because it's a magnificent church and a great history.
So our church is over 100 years old, 105, 100, heading into 106 years old. It's my home church, by the way. It's the only church I've ever belonged to in the course of my life.
So you grew up there.
I grew up there. Yeah,
That's amazing.
I am pastoring people who once taught me in Sunday school. Deacon Walton used to tell me in Sunday school class, "Sit down, John Jenkins." And now in deacons meetings, I say, "Sit down, Deacon Walton." It's
That's
like a
amazing.
lot
So
of
he's still a deacon today. That's
well,
incredible.
he passed. He
Okay.
passed, so he's not alive now. But I'm just using that as an illustration.
Right.
He
Okay.
was he was a guy who poured into me and mentored me, and here I became his pastor. And he respected me as his pastor. So our church is, like I said, over 100 years old, 105, 106 years we're entering to. I've been there this is my 35th year. So
Good
this
for you.
November, I will celebrate 35 years at First Baptist Church of Glen Arden. It's right outside of Washington, D.C. When I became the pastor, we might have had maybe 400 people, 300 to 400 people. And this past Sunday, we had 10,000. So,
That's great.
we've had tremendous growth. We're really engaged in the community. We have 128 ministries, all of which have to do something to serve some need in the community, which I'm proud of, that our church is heavily involved in the community around us. And it's been an honor to be pastoring my home church.
Yeah, that's great. So how is it? I would have to think that's challenging to be pastoring, especially when you were 30 years old or in your 30s and you are having to pastor people like the deacon that you referenced. And so was that a challenge to overcome, to figure out how do I gain their respect and trust?
You know, if I could just again talk about one of the differences between the Anglo community and
Yeah.
the African American community is the honor and respect in the community toward the pastor.
Hmm.
Pastor is a highly respected person in position, and I had more problems with the people who were my peers
Hmm.
than I did with the senior people in the church. They understood respecting the office of the pastor.
Interesting.
And I know that's not always exactly the case in the Anglo community, but they showed me great respect, great honor. They
That's
showed that.
great.
And my peers, would call me by my first name. That's not normal in the African American community. And the mothers of the church would pull them to the side and say, he's no longer John to you, he's Pastor Jenkins.
Is that right? Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, so let me ask you, like I refer to you as John, and is that almost offensive to people that I do that, or should I be calling you Pastor John?
If you did that publicly in front of my church, they would take you out back and beat you with their canes. But it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
That it is not an issue for me. But and since like I said, I work in the Anglo communities a lot, chairman of the NAE board, president of Converge, which is primarily an Anglo organization, by the way. So it's okay. I'm not offended by it. But if I invite you to preach and you stood up and said, John, some of the people in our church would be offended.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. And that definitely is a cultural thing, because that's not the case.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in our white churches by any means. So yeah.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about longevity. And you said going into your 35th year. I am a big proponent of pastors sticking it out and staying long term. And there's a tendency as soon as we start hitting some rocky times to bail out and leave. And I would have to think in 35 years, John, that you faced adversity, that you went through difficult situations. And so what made you stay as long as you did?
Well, I felt it's a call. I mean, I felt God called me, and I believe it was his mandate for my life. And never would I abandon or walk away from an assignment that God gave me, because God knows what we face. We're going to face what we're facing and what we will face. And I don't believe, Romans 11:29 says the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. That's how the New King James Version puts it, meaning that once God extends something to you, once God calls you to something, he's not going to snatch it away. He's not going to come and take it back. And I would say to pastors who may feel frustrated or who may feel like quitting, I think it's important that you surround yourself with people who can encourage you during seasons of discouragement. People that you can talk to about what you're feeling or what you're facing, and who might be able to make suggestions to you and who might be able to encourage you. I know when I was by the way, I graduated with a master's degree from Wheaton College, and I started that class when I was over 60 years of age. I'm 65.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Over 60.
Yeah.
And every class I quit. Every class said, what am I doing? Why am I here?
Yeah.
But I had people around me. I had friends. I had classmates that we would encourage each other. And I would say to pastors who feel that point of frustration and discouragement, that before you just walk away, make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who have the ability to encourage you, and that you can talk through what you're facing and what's frustrating you. That's just talking about it, just being able to have a safe place to go and talk about what you're going through. And that's what I've done through the course of the years. When I got frustrated, I have friends around me who I can talk to. I have high valued relationships, and I talk with them about what are the challenges, or why am I frustrated, or why I feel like walking away. And they've always been able to encourage me to stay and stick with it.
Yeah, and I know that's real important to you, because even as you and I have talked, one of the things that you do a lot of is mentoring other pastors. And I'm not sure I'm trying to remember the word you use. I don't think it's mentor, but you
Use the word covering.
Covering. Yeah. So again, when we talk about differences from cultures, I think that's a big thing. It seems like in the African American church, and covering other pastors. So I will say real quick, John, that you did influence us, and even with what we're doing with the Advantage, and saying, how can we work with pastors around Pennsylvania specifically, and giving guys an opportunity to have other people that they can come around and talk to, and wrestle through some of the issues that they're going through. And so similar thing to what you do, but talk about covering real quick, because you have a big group of people that you're working with. So.
Yeah, so in our community, and by the way, I'm trying to encourage all communities to do this.
Yeah, you pushed me hard that I should be doing this. I remember.
You should. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pastoring, a pastor having a pastor, having someone who looks out for your soul, someone who gives you counsel, gives you direction. And that's what we call covering, to where a pastor has a pastor. The same thing that we want people to do, and our parishioners, our members to do, to be submitted to a pastor, to be covered, cared for by someone who looks out for your soul. pastors should have the same thing. They should have somebody that they look to for covering, they look to for support, they look to for advice. That's what it boils down to.
That's
Yes.
great. Yeah, and you've got some 100 plus, I think, pastors.
119,
It's amazing.
119
Yeah,
pastors.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Mhm.
And what a great opportunity for them to talk with you. I want to go back to the calling real quick because I think in my situation, I would say most pastors feel like they're called to ministry. I don't know that they would say they're called to a specific church. I could be wrong on that. And so as you see that, are you called to pastor, or are you called specifically to pastor to First Baptist Glen Arden? Or are they the same thing, or are they two different things?
Um, there can be they can be two different things, and I feel like I am called to pastor, and right now, particularly, I am called to pastor the First Baptist Church.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, I pastored another church first. I pastored a church, a small country church in Virginia, about, matter of fact, 55 miles one day away from my home.
Is that right? Wow.
And I would travel down to preach to 50 people, and do Bible study to 10.
Wow.
So, so I got called to the pastor, but I feel specifically right now at this season of my life, I'm called to pastor the First Baptist Church of Glen Arden.
That's great. So a couple of things that I'd just say about your experience there at First Baptist. One, obviously you're a strong leader. You built a big church, and very impressive. I had opportunity to spend time with your staff. One of the things that John and I were able to do, John came up and spoke to the staff at LCBC, and then John invited me down to speak to his staff there. And so great opportunity, but you've done amazing things. I remember, John, you took me on a tour of your building, and I used to think that we had great a lot of technology and stuff in our building, and we went to your building, and I thought, oh my goodness, we're not even scratching the surface of what all you have there from a technology standpoint, but just real impressive. And also just what you're doing with whether it's Converge or the different boards that you serve on. And so a strong leader. But one of the things I appreciate about you is as I was first kind of checking you out to find out who I was going to be talking with, I listened to some of your messages. I also listened to, I don't know if it was some kind of a town hall you were doing, but I remember there was a recording of a lady that kind of challenged you on something you had said. And I was just so impressed with your response to her, because you were just very, very gracious to her and very kind. For sure, in my younger years, had that happened to me, I would have probably snapped back and tried to put her in place. But I was just impressed by how gracious you were. And so appreciate your spirit of humility very much. But is that something that you had to learn, or is that something that has always been a trait of yours?
I think that's probably something that people would have said about me much of my life, that
Okay.
I try to walk in humility.
Yeah.
I try to not think more highly of myself than I ought to. And I try to deal with people compassionately. I try to show them compassion. Because I also recognize that sometimes when people challenge you or, come against you in some way, generally it's birthed out of some level of ignorance of something
Mhm.
that they don't know or they
Mhm.
don't understand. And I feel that's my role when I face those kind of situations, to educate you on what the facts are. And that's probably, I don't know, I don't remember which situation what you saw, but that's probably what I was trying to do, is educate her. And I would say to the pastors here that are watching this interview, that rather than being harsh with somebody, they're probably operating out of a lack of knowledge.
And it's funny, you said that your goal is to educate that person that you're responding to, which that's probably, again, when I was especially younger, my goal was to educate, but I wasn't coming at it from a position of compassion. And it was like, I'm gonna show you kind of thing and educate you. And so that spirit of compassion is huge, and just realizing that we don't have all the answers, or that we can come at somebody, even though we have authority, doesn't mean we have to exercise or try to dominate over people.
Absolutely. And I believe James 4:6 is true, that God opposes the plans of the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. By the way,
Yeah.
um, I believe, I firmly am persuaded that if the more we walk in humility, the more God smears us with his grace. And I like the way one translation says it. It says, God opposes the plans of the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. One translation says he resists the proud. So, I would tell pastors to not think more highly of themselves than they ought to, and to walk in humility.
Yeah, and those words are so strong, John, because it's not implying that he won't bless the proud. He actually resists and fights against us. So that's an
Absolutely.
incredibly strong passage. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So
Thank
we
you.
were talking about some things that are different from the African American, the Black community, or pastors and white pastors. One was during COVID. I remember you and I were talking. I think I even came down to visit you at one point, and you were, as we all were, preaching to empty auditoriums. And in the white community, for most of us, if somebody were ever to respond in the midst of the service to something we said, it would throw us off completely and we wouldn't know what to do. Where I remember you said in your environment, they're preaching to an empty room. It was really hard for you to preach without having people in the room. And so describe what you did to solve that or to resolve that situation for us.
So, my gift flows as I interact with people. That's how my gift gets its strength and gets motivated. So that's why having people in the room is important. And so when we couldn't meet in the room, what my team came up with, I didn't come up with this, but my team came up with this. They put a big screen in the sanctuary and invited people on Zoom. So I preached to the people on Zoom. So I had about 30 or 40 people on the Zoom, and in some cases, as many as 100 people on these big screens. And I could see their faces, I could see their reactions, and I could hear their responses to
Yeah.
me. So that's how my gift flows, and we did it through using Zoom, and it was great.
And it wasn't just a big screen, it was a massive screen. I mean, it covered it. From your standpoint, it almost looked like you were teaching to a full room there. So,
Right. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, no,
Yes.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
So let's shift and talk a little bit, John, about just some of the racial tensions going on. And again, that's what started my relationship with you and our conversations together and just trying to figure out how in the world do we deal with this? How do we move forward? And so my question to you is, where do you feel like we are now? So I first started talking with you probably almost exactly 4 years ago. And from my perspective, John, it's harder to talk about now than it was 4 years ago. So if anything, it almost feels like it's gotten worse, not better. But what's your perspective, and how do you view things, and how would you encourage us as pastors to kind of move forward?
Well, I think our country is more divided than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Uh, it's highly tensuous. I mean, there's so much
Yes.
tension across the country about it, and especially during this election year. I think that plays a part as well in this tension. And I think it's the role of the church to come and model to the world what it is that we ought to be doing. It's the response. It's not just our role; it's our responsibility to
Mm,
do it. And that's why I applaud you, David, because you did something that a lot of Anglo pastors don't do.
mm,
You reached into my world. You invited me to come and hang out with you for a day. You came and hang out with me for a day,
mm,
and we've cultivated and talked. You attended an event that was at my church to deal with race. You moved out of your comfort zone. I could just hug you right now. I could just put my arms around you, just love on you, because what you have done and what you did was so unique.
mm,
And if I could just be honest with you, Pastor, there were some other pastors that I have tried to do that with, and they did not reciprocate.
mm, mm,
In some cases, I could almost say I almost gave up on the white church being
mm,
willing to enter into my world or
mm, mm,
engage my world. But you didn't do that, and that's what I remember us talking. You moved me to tears,
mm, mm.
and you actually cried on the first meet. Just to talk about how we want the church to model being on one accord, being
Right,
together.
right.
And so yeah, the state of our country is hard. It's just not good right now, especially in this election year. And it's a challenge. So the church must step up and play the role of modeling before the world that we can get along, we can work together, we can love on each other, we can understand each other. It's the church's responsibility.
So part of that is just reaching out and developing relationships. Because one of the things I realized in my relationship with you, John, it's easy to build up in our minds stereotypes of what we think other people are like. And it's not even in race, it's just in every situation. But once we stop and have a conversation and get to know the other person, all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, we think alike on most things, and our differences are much less than what we thought. And so relationship is a piece of it. But what would you be telling the people there at First Baptist Glenarden? Or you talk about covering 119 pastors, and so how would you guide them in navigating the tensions that we're facing now? And you even talked about this being an election year. So what would your instructions or guidance be to them?
So I want to back up a little bit and share what our church did maybe 30 years ago.
Okay.
25, maybe 20, yeah, about 25, 30 years ago. It probably was 25 years ago. I had our church join a primarily Anglo denomination. In other words, we were accustomed to being a part of an African American convention, we called them, or denomination. And because I had people in my church who lived through the civil rights era, I had people who had the hoses and the dogs and got arrested for protesting for being treated equally. Their view of white people wasn't positive. And I wanted them to understand that not all white people are racist. Not all white people are evil. Not all white people treat human beings the way they had experienced. And so that was one of the reasons, one of three reasons why I joined this denomination. And so I'm saying to them, let's not give up on the fact that God has called us to love one another. That's the call of God, for us to love one another.
And John, did you know white people that weren't that way, or were you just assuming and hoping, or did
Oh
you
no,
have
no,
experiences? You
I
knew
had
people.
met, yes, I had
Yeah.
met some white people in Converge. That's
Yeah. Okay.
why I joined Converge, and I had met some white people in Converge.
Good.
And I knew, and I knew some white people who and how they treated me and how what their heart was. We had some race discussions and dialogue. So, and I knew that they had Converge had deliberately made decisions to plant churches, reach out relationally even though it was actually a Swedish organization. It was started by Swedes. And, but I know that they had over time deliberately and purposely made decisions to reach out into the communities that didn't look like them.
So how were you responded to, and how was your church and the people in your church? How did people respond to them?
Well, they welcomed my church with open
Good.
arms.
Good.
And our church has been fully engaged. I mean, we attend the conventions and conferences and the trainings, and we've hosted those things. And by the way, they just like your posture, they didn't just think that the only reason they would engage the African American community was to teach the African American community. They came to learn.
Yeah, that's good.
That was huge, that they thought and felt that there was some value or some things that could be learned from our community. That played a big part in helping us to feel a part of the conference.
So you just said a couple things, John, that I think are real significant. One, it's relationship based, I think is partly what you're talking about, but it's also the spirit that we come. We mentioned earlier, just having that spirit of compassion. And then also, though, coming with the attitude of wanting to learn, as opposed to thinking we have something to teach others. For us to come open hand and say, what can we learn from those that are different than us, I think is huge. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you joined Converge, and so continue to talk about what have you done over the years with First Baptist then to move them to where they are today and where you are today, and what kind of things are you telling, again, people from your church, but also those that you're covering and even those in Converge?
Yeah, so everything that I'm saying to you so far, that's what I be saying to them. I'm saying to them, engage. I'm saying to them, build relationships. I'm saying to them, go outside of your comfort zone. Go outside of where you're comfortable, and go into a world and meet and connect with people who don't look like you, who may not even operate the same as you operate. So just reach outside of that. That is really truly my message to them.
That's good.
Yeah.
And so I know our posture at LCBC has always been, let's stay neutral on politics. Let's not tell people kind of how to move forward, but that's our stance. Is that your stance at First Baptist, or do you get more direct with people and jump into politics? And
I believe it's the church's role to stand on what's truth. One of the words that I learned in my training is there's something. I believe in the sanctity of life, but I also believe in the sanctity of truth. And I'm teaching, I say and preach and declare, and what our church practices is we speak truth, period. Let it fall wherever it may. And with some of those truth matters, it's going to be in opposition to the Democrats, and in some situations, it's going to be in opposition to the Republicans.
Yeah.
So I probably don't like that word neutral, David. Because it means we won't speak to certain issues.
Right.
But we're going to speak to the issue, period. On whatever side the scriptures teach, whatever truth is, and let it fall where it may. I know some pastors are afraid to speak truth on certain matters because they might lose members. I don't care. I don't let me losing people become the factor of whether I will preach truth.
Right.
And that's what our congregation knows, that I'm going to stand for truth regardless of where it may fall, or who it may embarrass or be in opposition to. It doesn't matter. I am going to speak about the sanctity of life. I am going to speak about the sanctity of the marriage relationship of a one man and one woman during the course of one lifetime. I am going to speak to caring for the poor. Let me put it that way, that we have a responsibility to care for the people who are less fortunate than we are. I'm always going to speak to those kind of issues, immigration and all of those things. I'm going to speak to that, period. And our church knows, and they see me modeling that and challenging us in what our position should be in those regards.
Yeah, that's good. I like that a lot, John. And to your point, I think it sounds much better to say, let's talk about truth as opposed to staying neutral. And we would address all those same issues as well. But I think that's a good challenge to say neutral isn't probably the best word. It's just, let's talk about truth, and wherever the chips fall, let them fall. So do you find yourself having people that are upset with you on both sides of the aisle then for positions that you do or don't take?
Sometimes, but rarely. Sometimes, but rarely. For the most part, especially in my environment where I
because you're right there in DC. So I mean,
yeah. A lot of my parishioners, a lot of the members of our church work on Capitol Hill. That's their job, they're or government employees or whatever. But they value and appreciate that I speak truth, and they can't put me in one area or another area because I'm always communicating what the truth is. And so they wouldn't say I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. They would just say he's a messenger of what's right and a messenger of what the truth is.
And that definitely has gained you respect, John, because I remember in those meetings with Barbara Skinner, and there were people from all around the country that were there, and they held you in very high esteem. I know watching you on the National Association of Evangelicals, which I'm a part of as well, and people hold you in very high esteem. And so your position of speaking truth is one that gives I think people a real sense of confidence in you, and a sense of honor as well. And so it's fun to watch that play out. So do you think things can get better from as far as racial tensions? Do you think it's always going to be there, or what is your outlook?
I am hopeful. I have an attitude of hopefulness. I don't necessarily see it advancing large scale. I don't see masses and masses of people at one time doing it. I think it's a slow process. And Pastor, what I would say to the pastors that you're communicating with is, I would want to give them boldness to speak truth. I want to give them the boldness to take a stand and say some things. Because let me just say this. I don't know how much time we have left, but
You're good.
One of the most painful things to me was to see things like George Floyd or Mike Brown happen, and have the white church be silent. Oh, it was devastating when George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin. I was, and not just that he shot and killed him, but when he got exonerated, when he was declared innocent,
Mm.
I was livid
Mm.
that a man with a gun who's not a legal um, police officer, law enforcement agent, could walk around and harass a black person simply walking from buying some Skittles at a store to the home where he was staying and spending the night at, and harass him and end up shooting him and killing him.
Mm.
I was there's no words to describe. And the silence of the white church was equally as painful to me. That very few white pastors took a stand to say anything along these things. Just to watch that police officer hold George Floyd down for 9 minutes until he died,
Mm.
and the church not saying nothing.
Mm. Mm.
It was painful.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard.
So in answer to your question, I would say I don't see, something happening that's going to have masses of our country change overnight. I don't see that.
Yeah.
But if we can look little by little, piece by piece, just, me and you developing a relationship over these years has given me hope. And I would encourage pastors to cultivate relationships outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah, that's good. And I will say too, John, I mean, it takes intentionality and it takes effort because you're incredibly busy. I'm busy. And so to actually take the time to continue the relationship isn't always easy because
Mhm.
before you know it, 3, 4 months have gone by and we haven't connected. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my, I need to reach out again. So, yeah.
But we've been doing that. And that's the thing.
Yes.
Every now and then you'll send me a text. Every now and then I'll send you a text and hop on the phone, do a phone call, do a Zoom. We've maintained it, and we haven't been able to see each other as frequently as we would like.
Right.
But I still feel loved by you and cared for by you as a friend, and I'm honored to be in relationships with you. And
Yeah. And I would say likewise, John. So thank you. So I know you've written a book recently. You wrote a book, well, probably you've been writing for a long time, but it came out back in October.
yes, my first book.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
Did you do
It's
that while you were doing your master's at Wheaton as well?
while I was doing actually, I've been writing the book for a long time, even before I
Okay,
went into the master's program. So it probably took me years to write it and tweak it here and tweak it there, and eventually I was able to get it done and published by Zondervan on in October.
good for you. And tell us the name of the book.
Called Grace to Grow. It's about building a healthy church in an unhealthy world. And Grace to Grow, you can get it on Amazon. You can get a electronic version of it. You can get audio version of it, and it's really telling the story of how we built First Baptist from 300 or 400 members to 10,000. It highlights some of the ministries that we did, of how we're impacting the community. It's about some of the challenges and mistakes that we made. I want to say it's a really good book, not because I wrote it, but I tried to share my successes and my
Yeah.
failure in the book to try to teach pastors how to grow and develop their churches to be everything that God wants it to be. And so, Grace to Grow, you can get it on Amazon in any format you want, both digital, audio, or you can get a hard copy. Amazon will send you a hard copy, and it's an easy read, by the way. It's 17 chapters of the different things we've done to make a difference in our
Yeah, and I had opportunity to read it as before it was published and appreciated it very much. And John, essentially what you're doing is just giving church growth principles and using First Baptist Glenarden and your experiences. And it is chock full of stories of what you did right, what you wish you'd have done differently. And so a great read, especially if you're trying to grow your church or figure out what are the next steps to grow my church, then I think it's a great book. So congratulations on getting that done.
Thank
That's
you.
wonderful.
And thank you for the shout out. Thank you for the endorsement, by the way. You endorsed
Sure.
it, and I'm very honored to have your endorsement. Thank you, David, so much.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you for taking time with us today. Always appreciate you, appreciate your spirit so much, and excited to hear what's going on. I know. So let's talk COVID real quick again, because you guys were closed for, was it almost a year? Was it longer than a year?
2 years,
2
2.5
years. That's
years.
incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what's funny, at least in our context, we were only closed for 3 or 4 months, but when we opened the doors, we expected everybody to come flocking back. And that did not happen. They didn't come flocking back as fast as we thought they would. So what was your situation 2 years out, when you finally opened the doors, were people all ready to come back, or was it
Oh,
a slow,
no,
gradual
no,
thing?
no.
Yeah.
We went from 4 services down when we finally opened back up to 2. So we
Yeah.
cut our services out. The thing I do want to say is, even though our attendance went down, our offerings increased by 20%.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the case with some churches.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you know what's hard about that, John, is we're doing it's a different kind of work, but we're preaching once online, and then the offerings are going up, and so the challenge is to think, oh man, well, let's just keep keep doing it this way then. And yet we needed people back in the buildings, so
yeah. So we just recently went back to 3 services. We're almost back up to our pre-COVID,
okay,
pre-pandemic numbers. So we're
good,
right around 10,000 this past weekend. So
good for you.
we're right around where we were before. So yeah, it's the pandemic actually was a life changer in positive ways. We learned a lot. We made some shifts with how we do ministry. I think I talk a little bit about that in the book. And I think it's
Been a
an
good thing.
opportunity. It's a very good opportunity
Yeah.
church to be the church and impact its community.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just say to our guys too, one of the things that's I think different, and maybe it's a church that's more in an urban environment, though you guys are suburbs, but you're more in the city than for sure LCBC is, and so maybe it's that. But I also think it's a difference in the Black church and the white church, in that you guys are very involved in the community. You mentioned 128 ministries, and that's not typical of the white church. And so I would just challenge our guys and myself to be looking at what you guys are doing and say, how can we serve our communities better? And so congratulations for what you're doing, and
Yeah.
way to
Can
go
I
for
give one
leading well.
example of something
You may.
that I think is you can take a variation of this that I think would be a blessing to your pastors.
Yeah.
My son, who by the way is our young adult pastor,
Okay.
got into riding bikes.
Hmm.
And he started a bike club. Now, it's not a ministry in our church, but it's an idea that he started a bike club, and hundreds of people joined this bike club. Hundreds of people
Wow.
joined it. And it's an evangelism tool.
That's cool.
We're using it to win people to the Lord and invite them and engage them in our church.
Yeah.
Do things like that. And I mean, y'all can think of, your pastors can think of some of the things that they do, that their members are doing, that they can engage the people that they relate with,
Exactly.
be a place to witness and share the gospel with them.
And sometimes we make it more complicated than we need to. So yeah, that's great. That's great. John, thank you for the time. Thank you for being an advantage to our Pennsylvania pastors, but thank you for being an advantage to so many people there in the DC area and around the country and really around the world. Your impact and your influence is huge. So thank you so much. And thank you for taking time with us today. Appreciate it.
It's my honor. Thanks for having me, David.
All right. Thank you, John.
God bless you.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft, and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.